Hi guys, today we're going to be making cake. I am going to show you how to make a chocolate cake this time. I have all of my ingredients out and ready to go. So I've got the mise en place all done, and it says one of the first steps is to put the butter in the chocolate, melt the butter in the chocolate. So I'm going to go ahead, and it says you can do it in the microwave or on the stove. So I'm going to do it on the stove, and you can see I've got my 2 cake pans ready and my oven is preheating, so that's good. I'm gonna throw my chocolate, and it's broken up into small pieces. So it can melt. Go ahead and turn it on. You want it on a pretty low heat. You don't want it really high because you don't want to burn it. We're just going to let it start to melt there. And I'm going to go ahead and start mixing the dry ingredients. We have to combine the flour, and I've got 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, the baking soda and the salt. There's a 1/2 teaspoon of salt and a teaspoon of baking soda. And we're just going to mix that together. And we're going to set that off to the side. See, the butter is already starting to melt. So we're going to give that a couple more minutes. You can see it's starting to melt down. The butter is almost totally melted. Still got a chunk of butter in there. And the chocolate is still a little chunky. I'm just going to keep stirring it and give it a couple more minutes. The chocolate and butter are all melted. So I'm going to pour it into my big mixing bowl. Pouring the rest of my chocolate and butter mixture into my bowl. I'm going to add the sugar. And it says to beat with the electric mixer until it's well blended. The eggs one at a time, and we're going to keep the mixer going while we do that. for the milk and the flour mixture, we add them in alternately, a little bit at a time. You don't add all of the flour in at once, because if you do that, then you have a shower of flour. Kind of loosen it up. Add in a little bit of the milk. And I keep scraping the sides of my bowl down. Just be careful not to get my scraper into my mixer. Add a little more flour. And some more milk. Rest of my flour. And the rest of the milk. There's what it looks like in the bowl, all mixed up, nice and chocolatey. Now there are a lot of different ways you can bake your cake. I'm going to do mine as a round 2-layer cake, so I need to put it into 2 separate round pans. And to make them even, I'm going to go ahead and weigh my batter. You do not have to weigh your batter. You can pour it into your 2 pans and just eyeball it. See how even you can get them that way. That works perfectly fine. So this all together is 7 pounds, and I know my bowl is 4 pounds. So if I take that 7 pounds altogether minus my 4-pound bowl, that leaves me 3 pounds of cake batter. If I divide that in half, that's about 1.5 pounds for each cake pan. So I'm going to put my cake pan on there, and I'm going to zero it out. Pour batter in there. So I want it to say about 1.8 or so. Right there I've got 1.83. Go ahead and do my second pan, zero it out. And pour into it. Now you can make this in a square pan, a rectangle pan. You don't have to do a layer cake at all. You can make it however you want it to look. And since I'm going to make a layer cake, I'm going to take my cake out of my pans when they're done, so I've got parchment paper in it. If you want to do that, you can use parchment paper. You can also use oil and flour, anything so that your cake won't stick, so you can pour it out of the pan when you're done. Alright, so that says it's about 1.5 And I had 1.3 in this one, so I'm going to go ahead and move some over. Hopefully I can get them pretty even. Alright, so that's about 1.7.2. That one's 1.68. That's pretty even, so I'm going to leave them like that, and I'm going to put them in the oven. They need to go in the oven at 350 for 32 to 36 minutes. Both pans are in the oven. They're on the top shelf, and there's some space in between them and around the sides, and we're going to let them bake for about 32 minutes. It has been 32 minutes. We're going to go ahead and check the cakes. To check them, you put a toothpick or a butter knife in the center, and it should come out clean. And this one's got some stuff on it, so it's not quite done. Let's check the other one here. Nope, and it's got some stuff on it too. They should come out without anything on them. So we're going to go ahead and put them back in. And we're going to reset our timer for about 3 more minutes. Okay, the timer has sounded again, so we're going to check our cakes again. And we just stick our toothpick right into the center. And that's pretty clean. That little bit that's on it is dry, so that shows that that one is done. And the second one, there's nothing on it, so it's done as well. Take them out, set them on pot holders on the counter. Okay, now they need to sit and cool there for about 15 minutes before I can take them out of the pan. The cakes have cooled for 15 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and take them out of the pans. To do that, I just run a butter knife around the edges and loosen them up. And since I have parchment paper in them, they should come out pretty easily. That's the advantage of using parchment paper. I'm going to lay my rack on top of it and flip it upside down and lift the pan off. And I'm going to peel the paper off because I don't need it anymore. Move that one out of the way. And do the second one the exact same way. Now I'm doing this, as I said before, because I'm making a layer cake. You do not have to do this. Usually when I make a cake at home, I just make it in a 9x13 pan and we serve it out of the pan. If you want to make a layer cake, that would be something you could do if you wanted to decorate a cake or have an extra kind of frosting on it or something like that. So it's going to be a little more of a fancy cake, so that's why I'm doing it. So I've got both of them out of their pans now, and I'm going to leave them set on the wire rack to cool. They're on a wire rack so they can cool all the way around, and it'll take quite a while. So I cannot frost them until they're totally cool. So they're going to sit here for probably a couple of hours before I get back to it. I am starting the frosting, the icing. I am going to be making a salted caramel buttercream frosting. You can make whatever kind of frosting you want to go on it, or you could eat it without frosting, or you could even do a store-bought frosting. It doesn't matter a whole lot. I'm just doing the salted caramel because it sounded pretty good with the chocolate. So the first thing I have is 1 1/4 cups of sugar in the pan, and I'm going to turn the stove on to a medium-high heat. I'm making the caramel to go in the frosting. And I'm adding 1/3 cup of water. And it has to be stirred constantly and heated up. It's gonna cook until it reaches about 320 degrees. And I have a thermometer so I can be checking the temperature on it. So it's gonna take a few minutes to heat up and boil. You can kind of see it in there. So I'm gonna let it work for a little bit. The sugar and the water are boiling. Temperature keeps going up. It's about 230 right now. We're shooting for 320, so it's going to take it a little while longer. If you're making caramel, you do want to make sure you have a thermometer. I'm using a thermometer that goes up quite a bit. You can, usually people will use a candy thermometer, and this is what a candy thermometer would look like. But as long as you have something that goes up to about 350 degrees so you can keep track of it is what you need. So we're going to go ahead and let this keep boiling for a while. We're still boiling, and I've got the thermometer in. You have to be careful not to let the thermometer touch the bottom of the pan because the pan is hotter than the liquid. You don't want that. So it looks like we're about up to 307, 306, so we're getting closer. Alright, so we've turned kind of a caramely color, and you can see we're well over our heat temperature. There we go, just a little over. Oh, now we're right on. Just have to be careful where you put your thermometer. You can see it's a nice caramely color, so we're going to go ahead with the next step in the process. The next step is to take it off of the heat, and we're going to stir in another 1/3 cup of water. And it's going to bubble and seize up a little bit, steam a lot. And we're going to put it on a low heat now. And we're going to let it cook on its low heat until it gets to 240 degrees. I'm going to stir it a little bit here because it's kind of all seized up into chunks. So we need to let the heat work and smooth it back out again. So you can see how it's got some chunks in it. So as it heats back up, those chunks should smooth back out. And we're going to leave it over a low heat for it to do that. While the caramel is still cooking, I'm going to go ahead and separate my eggs and my egg whites. For the icing, I need 5 egg whites. Egg whites will go in one bowl. Egg yolks will go in another bowl. You want to remember to crack your eggs on the counter or somewhere that's not the bowl you're using. That way you don't get shells in your eggs. And if you do get some little shells in there, you can go ahead and scoop them out with your spoon. That's 4. It's not cooperating. There we go. All right, that's 5. And always remember, after you work with eggs and get egg on your hands, you have to wash because Eggs carry salmonella just like chicken does. Give caramel a little stir. Check its temperature. It smells like caramel. Smelling pretty good. Smells like caramel corn. It's at about 335 right now, so we're going to give it a couple more minutes. It's reached 240 degrees. And you can see it's a nice caramel color. So we're going to go ahead and shut the heat off and start the next step with the frosting. Next step is to whip the egg whites. So I've got the 5 egg whites in the bowl, and I'm adding a teaspoon of salt, which is what makes it salted caramel. And we want the egg whites to be to form stiff peaks, so that's going to take a few minutes. In close to 5 minutes I've been whipping the egg whites, and they are pretty stiff. To check and see if they're stiff, you just touch them with the back of the spoon or with your mixer, and if they hold a peak like that, that's a stiff peak, and so it is ready to move on. This would be something that you would serve on like a lemon meringue pie. This is what a meringue is as well. It's part of the basis of the buttercream frosting. It's what makes it nice and fluffy. The next step of this icing is to continue to whip the eggs and slowly drizzle in the caramel syrup. Scrape the rest of the syrup out of the pan here. I can't do it all one-handed. And we need to continue to beat this until it's at about room temperature. So that's going to take a few more minutes. thermometer says it's 97 degrees and room temperature is between 70 and 75, so I'm going to continue to whip it for a while. But the icing has cooled down to about 73 degrees, so we're going to go ahead and start adding the butter. This recipe calls for 2 cups of butter, which is 4 whole sticks of butter. And we're going to put it in 1 chunk at a time. I just have it cut up into chunks, and after it's incorporated each time, we just add more in until it gets to be all in and makes a nice icing. Butter is whipped in, so the last step is to go ahead and add 2 teaspoons of vanilla and continue whipping until it's smooth. What the frosting looks like right now. That is not what it's supposed to look like. So I put it in the fridge to cool it off, and I'm going to try and whip it and see if that will help. If not, I'm going to try something else. As you can see, the whipping it did not help. I have done some reading, and I'm going to try to put some powdered sugar in it and maybe some cornstarch, and all of that should help, hopefully, thicken it up and make it more fluffy like it's supposed So the powdered sugar is helping. I've put about a cup in it, and I don't want it to get too sweet. So I'm going to try some cornstarch as well. Cornstarch is a very good thickener, and it does not add flavor. So we're going to try that and see if that will help. Should look like. It should hold its shape but still be spreadable, and I added probably about 4 cups of powdered sugar and about 4 or 5 tablespoons of cornstarch to thicken it all up. It still tastes pretty good, but this is probably a frosting recipe I will not be making again. Since we finally got the frosting done, I'm going to go ahead and get the cakes on the cake plate. Up. And I'm gonna put a little bit of frosting on the cake plate just to kind of help hold the cake in place so it doesn't want to slide off. Not a whole lot, just kind of some there in the middle. Don't want it falling off anywhere. Cake right on there and center it. All right, so then you start with the icing, and I am using an icing spreader. That's what this is. This is a kind of a medium-sized one. There are lots bigger. I have smaller one too for some edge work. You can use a butter knife. You might even be able to use a pie scoop. I don't really know. But something with a nice flat edge. And you pile the frosting on. And on the middle, since there's going to be a cake on top of it, you don't have to worry about being super neat. You do want to get frosting all the way to the edge, but you don't have to have it super smooth either. And since I had trouble with this icing, it's not quite as thick as a normal buttercream would be. You can see it's kind of dripping down the side of the cake there, but I think it'll be okay overall. So I'm going to go ahead and put my second cake on top of it. Frosting on there so I can spread it. And for this cake, I'm going to kind of let it go over the edge and help me spread. You want to make sure your cakes don't slide off of each other. Okay, now I've got it on there. It's not very neat yet. I'm going to go ahead and put it in the refrigerator and let it chill and thicken up a little bit. And then I'll be able to hopefully spread it a little smoother. The icing has cooled for a little while and set a little bit. So we'll be able to spread it without it wanting to drip too much. And we're going to go ahead and ice the sides. And to do that, you just want to scoop icing onto your straight edge, whatever you're using to frost your cake, and spread it. And you do want to be careful not to get crumbs into your frosting. You don't want to get cake crumbs in your frosting. You want it to be nice and smooth without a lot of crumbs in it. So if you get crumbs in it, there's a crumb right there, just have another bowl or something that you can scrape that bit of frosting off into. And when you frost the sides, it's best just to do a little at a time and keep going back over. Some crumbs in that one. So you can see here on the sides, I'm not covering everything the first time around. I will keep working and keep going around and around. You want to just kind of fill it in a little at a time as you go. Because the big blobs of frosting usually aren't going to stick very well. They're going to pull more cake off, you're going to want to run, and it just doesn't work as well. So you have to be patient. I've gone all the way around the cake, and there are still obviously spots that I need to go around again. So you just keep working, keep taking small amounts of frosting and smoothing the sides. And the edges can be kind of tricky, you just have to keep smoothing. Frosting a cake takes a lot of time and a lot of patience. So I've got the sides all frosted, and you can see it's not super smooth. You can leave it like that, you can smooth it out, you can do however you want, whatever you want your cake to look like. I'm just scooping a little bit off here that has some crumbs in it because I don't want that. Pretty smooth, and I'm going to keep working on it to smooth it. Now, a trick to get it even smoother than what it is right now, if you want to do it, is get a glass of hot water and you dip your spatula into it to heat the spatula up. Make sure you shake off the extra water. You don't want a lot of extra water on your frosting, but the heat helps smooth the frosting out. And so you just work it that way. Oops. Okay. And it's just repetitive. You just keep going over and over and over again. Till it's all smooth. And you do the same thing on the sides. Just be careful not to get a lot of water into your frosting. You can see here how that's smoothing the sides out. And you just keep repeating over and over and over until you get it as smooth as you want. Sides and top pretty smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and work on the edge now. And you just do the same process. Just smooth it a little at a time. Work on the side some, work on the top some. Make sure your knife is warm, but not super wet. We don't want our icing to come off. So we just kind of smooth it out as we go. I'm going to show you here. It's pretty smooth. There's a couple of spots in it that aren't greatest, and you can see kind of the cake showing through there a little bit. There's a few crumbs in there. That's what the top of it looks like. I'm going to go ahead and stop there, even though it's not 100% perfect. Sometimes if you're decorating on top of your icing, it can cover up some small flaws. What I'm going to do is pour a chocolate ganache over the top of it. So I think most of the flaws are going to be covered up with the ganache. You also want to make sure that your cake plate or your cake stand, whatever your cake is sitting on, is nice and clean. So you can take just a damp paper towel and smooth it along and kind of scoop up anything that you got on there. As remember, presentation is important, so I'm going to get some of that extra stuff off of my cake stand here. Be careful not to get into your frosted cake. Just right up to the edge. And if you were going to frost this, you would put a border down here on the bottom as well. You're going to do some decorating. So that will also cover up any imperfections on the very bottom of it. Okay, ready to start the chocolate ganache, and that's just 2 ingredients. It's just heavy cream and semi-sweet chocolate. You can see all of my supplies here. The first thing I need to do is break the chocolate up into smaller chunks and put them in a bowl. I'm just breaking the chocolate up, and it needs to be in pretty small pieces because after the cream gets hot, you just pour the cream over the chocolate and let it melt in the bowl. You don't actually heat the chocolate up in the pan. So if the chocolate's in small enough pieces, it will melt just like it needs to. So that's what I'm doing right now. making sure they're pretty small. Don't want them to be very big. I have the 8 ounces of chocolate all chopped up and put in a bowl, and I have measured out 8 ounces of cream, and this is heavy whipping cream. This is not milk. You cannot use milk for this recipe. You have to use cream, and the cream gets heated in the saucepan, so I'm going to pour it in the saucepan. And it's over medium heat until it just begins to gently simmer. And then it will get poured over the chocolate. We do not want it to come to a rapid boil. It's just going to get some bubbles around the edge when it's ready. So the cream is gently simmering. I'm going to shut it off, and I'm going to pour it over the chocolate. And then it sets for 2 or 3, 4 or 5 minutes, however long, and the hot cream will melt the chocolate, and then it'll get all mixed together. 3 or 4 minutes, so I'm going to gently stir the cream and the chocolate together. Until it's completely combined and the chocolate has melted. And of course, if you have small pieces of chocolate, if you chopped your chocolate very fine and tiny, it will melt pretty quickly, and this won't take a super long time. So I'm just gently working the cream and the chocolate together. And you don't want to beat it, it's a gentle stir. And a chocolate ganache is similar to a chocolate syrup, so you can use it as a chocolate drizzle. And that's what I'll be doing. I'll be drizzling it over the cake. You can let it cool and use it as a regular frosting, or you could make truffles out of it. This is how truffles are made, if you've ever had truffles or heard of truffles. They just let this cool completely and form it into balls. But I'm going to be using it as a drizzle. Chocolate ganache is all mixed up and melted. It's nice and glossy, just like it should be, and it's drizzly. You can use it like this, like I said. You can put it on fruit, you can put it on ice cream, you can put it on whatever you want to put it on. It's just chocolate sauce, a very rich chocolate sauce. I'm going to let it cool for a while because I do want it to drip down the sides of the cake, but I don't want it to run off of the cake. So I'm going to let it set for a while. So the chocolate ganache is cooled and the cake is cool, so I'm going to put it on. And I'm going to spread it. And I would like for it to spread down the sides of the cake and kind of drip down the side. Hopefully I didn't let it get too thick, and it will do that. So it's stripped down the side. I've got it all over the top. And the chocolate ganache has covered up most of the imperfections. So it should be good to eat.